A federal court has now approved a $23 billion child welfare settlement for people affected by Canada's on-reserve foster and welfare system. This is the largest settlement in Canadian history, and it comes after the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal found the government discriminated against children and families based on their race for decades. It has ordered Ottawa to pay $40,000 for each affected First Nations child and family member in 2019. Now, the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society and the Assembly of First Nations are the ones who launched the human rights complaint that forms the basis of this settlement. They did that back in 2007. And Cindy Blackstock, the Caring Society's executive director, is our guest this morning. Cindy, this settlement is both for children who experience this system and their family members. How did the issues within the welfare services affect entire families?
Well, what happened, Anne-Marie, is that the federal government funds public services for First Nations, but they've been doing it at far lesser levels than everyone else. And on the heels of the trauma of the residential school, First Nations families were getting about 30% less support than everyone else, despite the higher degrees of trauma. And that all built up on families' hopes and dreams, and children were separated from their families at rates 17 times more likely than the non-Indigenous families. On top of that, they were also denied equitable health care, social services, and other types of educational support. So it really just created a whole perfect storm of disadvantage, and it was the children and the families who paid the price of it in devastating ways.
Cindy, you and I have had many conversations, not just in the 8 seasons of this show, but over the years. You launched this complaint back in 2007. What was your reaction to the decision yesterday?
It was, a mix. I feel really sad that it had to be paid, because every time compensation is paid, Anne-Marie, children and families have lost their childhoods. But I also feel good that there's actual justice for them, that there's some recognition that they have been heard. And so that's an important step. But what it did for me is also really strengthen my conviction to making sure that discrimination stops and doesn't hurt another generation of kids.
The proposed settlement included a request for the Prime Minister to apologize for the government's role in the breakdown in the system. How important, or what importance do you think it has for the government to acknowledge its responsibility?
I think it's really important, but it needs to be a meaningful apology. In the case of the Government of Canada, it needs to apologize to the victims that are hurt and who are now eligible for compensation. But it can't apologize when it's still doing the wrongdoing to other children. You can't apologize and then continue the same bad behavior. So we're seeing some non-compliance with the existing orders, and we're hoping that this settlement and all of the Canadian public will ensure that the Canadian government meets its legal obligations and stops discriminating against kids.
The fear or the hope, depending on which side of this case you were on, is that this sets precedent. So what kind of precedent does this decision set for how the federal government deals with human rights claims by First Nations people? This is not the only one.
No, it's not the only one. I mean, my hope is that the message is to the federal government is fix the problems when you know about them and have the solutions. 23 years ago, Anne-Marie, we documented these inequalities and proposed solutions with the federal government how to fix it. Had they adopted it then, it would have only been hundreds of millions of dollars to fix, and it would have saved thousands of children's childhoods and indeed their lives. They chose not to do it, and now they're having to pay the $23 billion, but that's never going to make up for what the kids lost. So do the right thing, implement the solutions on the books, like murdered, missing Indigenous women and girls, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action.
It is one step of a long road. Cindy Blackstock, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this, be sure to subscribe here, or you can check out more Your Morning videos right here.